Hey there, dreamers. Welcome back to our channel. Before we drift into the classic journey of Dipper Pines from the show Gravity Falls, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from tonight? And what time is it for you right now? Drop it in the comments below. It's always fascinating to see how far and wide our sleepy little community reaches. All right, without further ado, lights low, blankets up, let's begin. The attic of the Mystery Shack was quiet, wrapped in the stillness that only came after the day had ended. The air was cool and gentle, carrying in the faint smell of pine from the woods outside. Above the roof, the sky stretched wide and dark, with only the soft glow of stars peeking through the window to join the warm, steady light of a single lamp. Dipper sat at his desk, the little wooden chair creaking softly beneath him. The surface of the desk was scattered with a few familiar items: a compass, a stack of folded notes, a small flashlight, and, of course, the most important objects of all, his journals. The worn covers looked as though they had traveled through countless days and nights of adventure. Yet in this calm moment, they were simply resting quietly in front of him. He picked up one of the journals carefully, almost reverently, as though handling something alive. His fingertips brushed the edges of the pages, feeling the little grooves and slight bends where the paper had been thumbed through again and again. Setting it down gently, he opened it to a blank page near the back. The lamp's glow fell across the sheet of paper, making it look almost golden. With a soft exhale, Dipper reached for his pencil. He twirled it in his fingers for a moment, tapping it lightly against the desk in thought. The sound was small, rhythmic, and oddly comforting, like the gentle beat of a drum. Beyond the attic walls, the faint chorus of crickets added a steady backdrop to the night. Every now and then, the wooden beams of the shack would groan quietly, settling as the cool night pressed against them. He lowered his pencil to the page and began to write. The lead scratched faintly, the quiet sound filling the little attic like a whisper. He didn't write hurriedly, the way he sometimes did when uncovering mysteries or chasing after clues. Tonight his words moved at a slow, unhurried pace. He was simply reflecting, letting thoughts drift onto the paper the way a breeze drifts through an open window. His first lines were not about monsters or secret codes, but about the evening itself. He described the way the air felt lighter after a long day, how the shadows of the trees outside stretched long across the yard, and how even the silence seemed alive in Gravity Falls, as though it was holding secrets of its own. The words formed easily, each one a step deeper into calm reflection. Every so often, Dipper paused. He'd set the pencil down lightly, lean back just a little, and let his gaze wander out the small attic window. The moon hung low, framed by tall trees swaying gently. A few fireflies blinked in the yard below, tiny floating lanterns keeping their own rhythm. He imagined them as little guardians of the night, quiet but constant. Watching them flicker softly made his shoulders relax, as though the world outside was reminding him that everything was safe and still. He smiled faintly, then leaned forward again to continue writing. His thoughts moved to the journals themselves. These books had once felt like heavy burdens full of dangerous knowledge, mysteries that pressed down on his young mind. But tonight, they didn't feel like that. They felt like old friends, the kind who carried not just the weight of fear, but also the weight of memory, the good kind. Adventures with Mabel, moments of laughter, the kindness of friends like Suze and Wendy. The journals held all of it, tucked away in ink and scribbles. He wrote slowly, remembering the laughter he and Mabel shared when trying to decode strange symbols, or how Wendy once teased him about his endless note-taking. Even Grunkle Stan's gruff voice echoed faintly in his memory, reminding him that not everything in life had to be a mystery, that sometimes life was simply about living. The pencil paused again. Dipper's gaze softened as he thought of Mabel, likely asleep already in the bed across the attic. The sound of her gentle breathing reached him faintly, steady and reassuring. He glanced over for a moment, smiling at the sight of her bundled in her colorful blanket. Waddles curled contentedly at her side. The peaceful scene made the attic feel warmer, safer, like a cocoon, away from the world's strangeness. Turning back to the journal, he wrote about that too, the comfort of family, the warmth of having someone to share not only adventures but quiet nights with. He pressed the pencil gently, careful not to make the words too sharp. Each line was meant to be soft, like a whisper to the future, reminding himself that these were the moments that truly mattered. And so he kept writing. The attic air was still, broken only by the sound of pencil against paper. Each stroke carried the weight of thought, yet the motion itself was soft, unhurried, like a lullaby written in graphite. Dipper leaned forward, his elbow resting gently on the desk as his other hand guided the journal open. The light from the lamp stretched in a golden circle across the pages, leaving the rest of the room cloaked in shadow, like a secret world where only he and the journal existed. The more he wrote, the calmer he felt. His words weren't about decoding codes or unraveling the town's strangest mysteries tonight. Instead, they wandered in gentle directions. He described the patterns of the stars he had seen earlier in the evening, tracing constellations in his mind as though they were old friends waving from above. He sketched a simple outline of the Big Dipper in the corner of the page, a little nod to the name that had always made him feel oddly connected to the night sky. The scratching sound of his pencil echoed like a steady rhythm, keeping him grounded. The journal, once a tool of urgency and fear, had transformed into a quiet canvas for memory. He wrote about the smell of pine needles when the wind blew through the forest, about the way the shack's porch creaked when you leaned on it, and about the warm glow of fireflies blinking along the edges of the grass. Simple things, the kinds of details one only noticed in silence, became treasures as he carefully put them down in words. A faint yawn escaped him, but he didn't stop. Instead, he stretched a little in his chair, rolling his shoulders slowly until the tension eased away. His movements were quiet, mindful not to disturb Mabel across the attic. He listened for a moment, hearing her soft breaths as she dreamed, the tiny snuffle of Waddles shifting in her arms. The sound brought a smile to his face, and he jotted down a quick note. Mabel talks in her sleep sometimes, but even her dreams are cheerful. The attic walls seemed to lean in with him, holding him in their wooden embrace. Every creak of the shack felt familiar now, a comforting sound instead of a worrying one. He knew these walls, knew the patterns of the boards, and the way the air carried whispers of the forest outside. Tonight, everything felt safe. He wanted to capture that safety on the page, so that even in busier days to come, he could return to these words and remember the stillness. He paused again, this time resting his chin on his hand as he looked at the small collection of objects near the desk's corner. A little pine cone Mabel had painted with glitter, a pair of walkie-talkies, and a tiny rock shaped almost like a heart. He let his pencil drift as he described them in the journal, noting how even the simplest things carried meaning. Each one held a piece of a memory, and together they created the kind of quiet story that didn't need solving. It only needed remembering. After a while, his handwriting grew slower, the letters rounder and less hurried. His eyes felt heavier, yet his mind was calm. He traced his pencil softly along the edge of the paper, doodling small stars, triangles, and swirls in the margins, filling the white space with gentle patterns. There was something soothing about letting shapes form without thinking too much, almost like letting his thoughts wander into dreams before he even closed his eyes. He leaned back slightly in his chair and let his gaze rise to the attic ceiling. The old wooden beam stretched overhead, sturdy and silent. He thought about how many people had probably slept beneath this roof before him, how many nights of peace the shack had held despite its strange reputation. He imagined those who had lived here long ago quietly drifting off under the same stars he saw now. That thought made him feel connected to something bigger, something timeless and calm. The lamp flickered faintly, not from weakness but from the natural sway of the filament. Its golden glow shimmered across the desk, making the journal's pages gleam warmly for a moment. Dipper blinked slowly, appreciating the way light could turn the ordinary into something magical. He wrote about that too, how even light itself seemed like a story told without words, glowing gently in the silence. He set his pencil down for a moment and pressed his palms together, rubbing them slowly to warm his fingers. The night was cool, but not uncomfortably so. It had the kind of crispness that kept you awake just enough, while still inviting you to sink deeper into calm. He rested his hands on the desk and closed his eyes for a brief pause, just listening. Crickets chirped. A far-off owl hooted once, and the sound of Mabel's steady breathing filled the room like the softest lullaby. With a quiet sigh, he opened his eyes again and picked the pencil back up. His thoughts returned to the page where he wrote about gratitude. Gratitude for the stillness of this night, for his sister's companionship, for the safety of the shack, and for the mysteries that, though strange, had led him here. The words were tender, carefully chosen, as if he wanted them to last. The attic seemed to breathe with him, exhaling in rhythm, as if encouraging him to let his mind wander further into peace. And so he did. The pencil continued its slow journey across the page, but the lines grew softer now, less like a record of the day, and more like a quiet conversation with himself. Dipper wasn't writing to solve a puzzle or to uncover some hidden truth. Instead, he was writing to remember, to place gentle anchors in the calm sea of his thoughts. He thought back to earlier in the day when the sun was still shining over Gravity Falls. The forest had been alive with movement, birds darting between trees and leaves rustling with every shift of the wind. Yet now, in the stillness of night, the forest had changed. He wrote about the contrast, the difference between daytime busyness and nighttime peace. In the dark, the forest seemed almost sacred, as though it belonged to the stars themselves. He could almost hear its heartbeat, steady and patient, hidden beneath the hush of the crickets. Pausing, he let his pencil hover while he listened again. There was no urgency to the silence. It simply existed, flowing in and out of the attic window like a tide. He smiled faintly, thinking about how much he used to fear silence. In the beginning of the summer, quiet moments made him restless, his mind rushing to fill them with theories, codes, and answers. But now, after so many experiences, silence had become a companion. It felt safe. It felt earned. He wrote about that, too, describing how silence was no longer empty but full of meaning, full of memory. Each hush carried echoes of the past. Laughter shared with Mabel, mysteries explored with Suze, quiet encouragement from Wendy, even the grumbling affection of Grunkle Stan. The silence wasn't lonely. It was layered, like a blanket woven from all the voices and moments that had touched his life. Dipper's eyes softened as he thought about Mabel again. He turned his head for just a moment to glance at her. She hadn't stirred, still curled comfortably beneath her blanket. A strand of her hair had fallen across her face, and even in sleep, her lips curved in the faintest smile. Waddles gave a small snort as he shifted, his round body pressing closer against her side. The sight made Dipper chuckle quietly under his breath, though he quickly covered his mouth to keep from waking them. He returned to his journal and added a line. Feels like the whole attic is breathing together tonight. His handwriting grew looser as his eyelids blinked heavier, but he kept writing, letting the flow carry him. He described the attic itself, the way the slanted ceiling hugged the room, the small window that framed the night sky, the wooden boards that creaked like an old friend settling into bed. He noted the little details that made it theirs, Mabel's drawings taped on the walls, the glow-in-the-dark stickers she had scattered across the ceiling, his own careful stacks of notes neatly piled on one side of the desk. Each detail was a part of their summer, a story written not in ink, but in living. The longer he wrote, the more he felt the journal shift beneath his hand. It no longer felt like a book he had discovered in fear, but like a diary he was creating out of love. Love for his sister, love for his friends, love for the town that had challenged and surprised him in equal measure. It was strange, he thought, how even the strangest places could become home when filled with the right people. A soft breeze drifted in from the window, carrying the faint scent of pine and the cool touch of night air. Dipper closed his eyes briefly, breathing it in, then leaned down to the paper once more. His pencil moved slowly, almost lazily now, sketching not words, but a simple outline of a pine tree. He shaded it carefully, though his strokes were faint and light, more like a whisper than a mark. Around it he drew stars, small, gentle dots, scattered across the page like a mirror of the sky outside. The rhythm of drawing soothed him even further. Each tiny star, each faint line of the tree was another step toward rest. He wasn't trying to capture reality perfectly. He was letting the feeling of the night pour through him, steady and calm. He leaned back again, gazing at the page with soft satisfaction. The pine tree stood quietly in the center, surrounded by stars, and beneath it, his words rested like a foundation of memory. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough to remind him of this night, this silence, this peace. His hand rested loosely on the edge of the journal, pencil still between his fingers. For a moment, he didn't write at all. He just listened. Listened to the sound of the night, the attic, and his own calm breathing mixing together. It was the kind of quiet that didn't ask for anything in return, the kind that wrapped around you gently and promised you could let go. He let his eyes linger on the page one last time, then whispered softly to himself as though sealing the thought, This feels good." And with that he dipped his pencil once more into the stillness of the night, letting words flow in an easy stream. The journal lay open before him, its pages slowly filling with words, sketches, and quiet thoughts. Dipper's hand moved more lazily now, his pencil tracing curves and letters with less urgency than before. The steady rhythm of writing had become almost like a lullaby, each line carrying him deeper into restfulness. He wasn't trying to create anything perfect. He was simply letting the page receive whatever his heart wanted to share. He wrote about the attic itself once more, this time noting the way the golden glow of the lamp softened every corner. Shadows bent gently against the slanted ceiling, not in a way that seemed eerie or strange, but in a way that felt protective. They lingered like guardians, keeping watch over him and Mabel as they rested. He added a note in the margin. "Even shadows can be friends if you see them the right way." As his pencil drifted lower, he paused and let his gaze wander again through the small attic window. The stars above seemed endless, yet somehow close, like pinpricks of light sewn carefully into a dark, comforting blanket. He traced their outlines with his eyes, then slowly copied them onto the page. His sketch wasn't precise, just clusters of dots and faint lines. But that didn't matter. What mattered was the act itself and the way the stars moved from sky to page, reminding him that even the farthest things could feel near when given attention. His thoughts shifted toward tomorrow, but instead of lists or worries, they were soft hopes. He wrote, "Maybe tomorrow we'll take another walk into the forest. Maybe I'll try to sketch more of the trees. Maybe we'll just laugh at something silly and I'll remember it later when the night grows quiet again." The words were gentle promises, not obligations, dreams of simple joys he looked forward to. Dipper leaned back slightly, feeling the wooden chair creak beneath him. He closed his eyes for a moment, resting the pencil across the journal's spine. The attic hummed with its usual sounds, the creak of timber, the faint whistle of wind slipping past the roof, the soft, steady breaths of his sister asleep nearby. Waddles gave another faint grunt, followed by a small shuffle of his hooves against the blanket. Dipper smiled at the sound. It grounded the attic in warmth, reminding him that home wasn't the place itself, but the people and creatures filling it. He reached for his pencil again, writing just a few more words. They came slowly, but they carried weight. "I think I finally understand that sometimes the most important mysteries aren't about the unknown. They're about the ordinary. The way the stars look through this window. The way Mabel laughs at her own jokes. The way the shack feels safe at night. These are mysteries I don't need to solve. I just need to notice them." His hand lingered on the page after the last sentence, fingers brushing faintly against the edge of the paper. He let out a long breath, one that seemed to carry away the last bits of tension in his shoulders. The attic felt very still now, not heavy but light, as though the walls themselves were breathing along with him, content to simply exist in this moment. He placed the pencil down carefully beside the journal and let his fingers trail along the cover. The book felt warm beneath his hand, as though it had absorbed the glow of the lamp, the softness of the night, and the tenderness of his words. He closed it gently, the pages pressing together with a quiet thump. The sound was so soft it barely registered, but to Dipper it felt final, like the closing of a peaceful chapter. His eyes lingered on the shut journal for a while, watching the lamplight shimmer across its worn cover. He imagined how it would look tomorrow, waiting for him again, ready to hold more thoughts, more sketches, more quiet moments. The idea comforted him, reminding him that some things, like journals and stars and laughter, were always waiting when you needed them. Slowly he rose from the chair, stretching his arms upward until his back gave a satisfying crack. He moved quietly, mindful of the sleeping form just across the room. His footsteps on the attic floor were soft, like whispers carried in wood. He placed the journal gently on the desk's corner, beside the compass and small pile of notes, leaving it to rest under the lamp's glow. Before turning away, he looked out the window one last time. The stars were still there, endless and steady. He smiled softly, as if they were keeping watch for him, promising to hold the night together while he drifted into sleep. When he finally slipped back toward his bed, the room felt warmer than before. The lamp still glowed faintly, but its light was dimmer now, softer, almost ready to fade. He sat on the edge of his mattress for a moment, letting his eyes wander over Mabel and Waddles. They were undisturbed, lost in their own dreams, and the sight filled him with peace. He whispered, though no one could hear it, "Good night." The word lingered in the air, gentle and light, before fading into the attic's calm. The night air outside the Mystery Shack was cool and refreshing, carrying the earthy scent of pine needles and damp soil. As Dipper stepped quietly onto the porch, the wooden boards gave a soft creak beneath his sneakers, a sound swallowed almost immediately by the vast hush of the forest. He paused for a moment, letting his eyes adjust to the dim light. The glow of the lamp inside the shack spilled faintly through the window, but beyond that, the world was bathed in silver. The moon hung high, its pale light brushing across the tops of the trees, and stars glimmered endlessly in the sky above. The whole forest seemed painted in blue and silver, hushed and still, yet alive with the subtle stirrings of nocturnal life. Somewhere in the distance, an owl gave a low call, answered by the faint rustle of branches shifting in the breeze. Dipper wrapped his hands into the pockets of his vest, breathing deeply as he stepped down from the porch and onto the forest path. Each step pressed softly against the dirt, muffled by layers of fallen needles. The air was cool against his face, brushing like silk across his skin. He walked slowly, carefully, savoring the stillness. This wasn't an adventure with a flashlight and journal in hand. This was something gentler, a walk for the sake of walking. The path curved ahead, winding between towering pines whose trunks stretched like pillars into the sky. Their branches whispered faintly as the wind passed through them, a soft song that rose and fell in time with his footsteps. Dipper tilted his head back, gazing upward at the silhouettes of branches against the stars. The patterns they made were familiar to him, but under moonlight, they seemed almost magical, like veins of shadow running across a glowing canvas. As he walked further, the forest seemed to expand around him. The ground dipped gently, then rose again, carrying him deeper into the heart of Gravity Falls woods. Fireflies drifted here and there, tiny lanterns floating on invisible strings. Their light blinked in slow patterns, glowing briefly before fading, then glowing again. He watched them carefully, noting how they never hurried, never rushed. Each light appeared and disappeared in its own time, and together they created a rhythm that was calming to follow. Dipper stopped at one point, crouching slightly to watch a firefly resting on the edge of a fern. Its tiny body glowed with a soft golden hue, like a miniature star that had chosen to live among the leaves instead of the sky. He smiled faintly, whispering to himself so quietly that even the trees might not hear. "You're like a star I can hold." Straightening again, he continued along the path. The quiet of the forest wasn't empty. Every sound felt intentional. The rustle of a squirrel leaping from one branch to another, the faint chirps of crickets weaving their chorus. Even the sigh of the wind as it passed through the trees carried a sense of calm. It was as if the entire forest had slowed its heartbeat to match his own. He thought about how different this felt from the day. In daylight, the forest was vibrant, noisy, filled with bird song and the scuttling of animals. But at night, it was transformed. The shadows stretched long, the trees stood like watchful guardians, and the ground seemed to hum with a kind of quiet magic. He realized that the forest didn't sleep at night, it simply changed, becoming gentler, quieter, more thoughtful. As he walked, he let his hand brush against the bark of one tree, feeling its rough grooves under his fingertips. The tree was cool to the touch, solid and ancient, a reminder that it had stood here long before him and would likely remain long after. That thought was strangely comforting. In a world filled with mysteries and questions, there were some things, like trees, like stars that stayed steady. The path curved again, leading him toward a small clearing. The moonlight poured freely here, unbroken by branches. The ground glowed softly, painted silver, and the air felt open and wide. Dipper stepped into the clearing slowly, his eyes lifting to the sky once more. The stars seemed brighter here, shimmering in clusters that stretched endlessly. He tilted his head back and simply stood still, breathing in the vastness. For a long moment, he didn't write or sketch or even think about what he might say later. He just existed, standing beneath the night sky, surrounded by forest, listening to the gentle rhythm of the world. It was quiet, but not silent. It was alive, but calm. It was exactly the kind of peace he hadn't known he needed until he found himself standing in it. He let out a long breath, and it drifted into the night like a soft cloud, fading upward into the stars. And then slowly, he began walking again, his footsteps carrying him deeper into the gentle embrace of the woods. The forest path stretched on ahead of Dipper, winding through the silver-tinted shadows. Each step carried him further from the shack, yet he felt no unease. The woods were calm tonight. Their usual strangeness softened into something gentle, almost welcoming. He could hear the faint ripple of water somewhere nearby, perhaps a small creek winding its way between the trees. The sound mingled with the hush of wind and the faint buzz of crickets, weaving a tapestry of nighttime music that asked for nothing but listening. Dipper slowed his pace, letting his eyes wander from tree to tree. Their trunks rose tall and steady, dark against the pale glow of the sky. Some leaned gently, their branches arching overhead to form a canopy that let the moonlight slip through in narrow streams. Others stood wide and ancient, their bark textured with lines like the wrinkles of an old face. He reached out every so often to brush the surface of a trunk, letting his fingertips linger on the cool grooves. Each touch felt like a small handshake with the forest itself. As the creek's sound grew clearer, he turned slightly off the path, following the faint trickle until it revealed itself in the moonlight. A narrow ribbon of water slipped between mossy rocks, glimmering faintly under the stars. The surface reflected the sky like a broken mirror, rippling as tiny currents danced across it. He crouched by the edge for a moment, watching how the light shifted with each movement. A frog croaked softly nearby, and the sound made him smile. He picked up a small pebble and set it gently into the current, watching as it tumbled forward before disappearing beneath the water. The creek carried on as though it had been expecting the gift, its quiet murmur never interrupted. He wrote the moment into his memory, thinking how strange and beautiful it was that even the smallest action, dropping a pebble, could ripple quietly through the night. Standing again, he followed the line of the water as it curved back toward the trees. Fireflies hovered here too, their light mirrored in the water below, so that the creek seemed alive with stars of its own. For a moment, it looked as though the forest floor had opened up to reveal the night sky beneath his feet, and the thought made his heart feel light. He whispered to himself, "It's like walking on the edge of two skies." Returning to the path, he continued at a steady pace, each step measured and quiet. The forest thickened again, branches leaning closer, their shadows stretching across the ground in dark lines. The moonlight flickered between them, forming shifting shapes that moved with every sway of the wind. Dipper let his imagination wander for a moment, seeing animals in the shadows or secret doorways drawn by light and dark. Normally, his curiosity would pull him to investigate, to search for meaning, but tonight, he simply enjoyed the patterns, letting them drift past like passing clouds. A breeze brushed through the clearing, lifting the edges of his hair. It carried the cool scent of earth and pine, sharper than the daytime air, but refreshing. He closed his eyes for a few steps, breathing in deeply, letting the forest settle into him. Each inhale seemed to stretch his chest with calm, and each exhale released a little more of the day's leftover restlessness. When he opened his eyes again, he noticed something ahead. A fallen log lying across the side of the path. Moss covered much of its surface, glowing faintly in the moonlight, soft and velvety like cushion. He approached it and sat down carefully. The wood cool beneath him, the moss springy against his hands. For a while he just sat there listening. The forest sounds wrapped around him like a blanket. The creek's trickle, the cricket's song, the occasional flap of wings in the distance, all of it wove together into a symphony of gentle noise. None of it was loud. None of it was sharp. It was a music meant for rest, meant for reflection. Dipper leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, looking down at the forest floor. Fallen needles and leaves carpeted the ground, their shapes softened in the dim light. He traced circles in the dirt with the tip of his shoe, slowly, absent-mindedly. He thought of how many times he had walked this forest in search of answers, chasing mysteries that pulled him deeper into danger. But tonight, the forest wasn't a puzzle. It was a friend, a quiet companion, willing to share its secrets not through codes or symbols, but through stillness. He felt that stillness now seeping into him, calming him in ways words couldn't fully capture. Lifting his head again, he tilted his gaze back to the sky. The trees framed the stars in small windows overhead, as if the heavens had been broken into puzzle pieces by branches. Each window showed a cluster of shining lights, twinkling patiently. He imagined them as lanterns lit by unseen hands, guides for wanderers who found themselves alone in the woods. He didn't feel alone, though. Not at all. After a few minutes, he rose from the log and continued walking, his steps light and steady. The forest shifted around him once again, each turn offering something new, yet always in the same gentle rhythm. And so the walk went on, deeper into the silver-painted night. The path curved gently downward, leading Dipper into a part of the forest he didn't often visit. The trees grew closer here, their tall trunks standing like watchful sentinels. Their branches wove together overhead, forming a canopy so thick that only small fragments of moonlight slipped through, casting soft patches of silver across the ground. His footsteps fell into those patches one by one, as if he were stepping across stones in a quiet river of shadows. The air felt cooler beneath the canopy, but it wasn't the kind of cold that made him shiver. Instead, it wrapped around him like a gentle hand on his shoulders, encouraging him to slow his pace. His breathing fell into rhythm with the hush of the forest, deep inhales followed by slow, calm exhales. He noticed how even the crickets seemed quieter here, their chorus softer, more delicate. For a while, he let his thoughts drift without trying to guide them. His mind replayed little fragments of the summer, moments with Mabel, times spent with Wendy and Suze, even Grunkle Stan's grumpy remarks that almost always hid a layer of affection. He remembered running through the woods with his sister at his side, chasing mysteries that always seemed just out of reach. And yet, even as those memories flickered through his mind, he realized how different this night felt. There was no rush, no chase, no urgency. Just him, the stars above, and the trees that had seen countless nights before this one. He stopped when he came across a large stone resting near the path, half covered in moss. It looked like it had been here for centuries, weathered by rain and sun, and now touched softly by moonlight. Dipper placed his hand on it, feeling its cool surface beneath his fingers. He let his palm rest there for a long moment, imagining how many other hands, human, animal, or perhaps even something stranger, might have brushed against it before. The stone, silent and steady, didn't need to say anything. It simply existed, and that was enough. Continuing his walk, he noticed the way the forest opened slightly again ahead, revealing another small clearing. This one was quieter than the first, smaller, more intimate. The ground was blanketed in ferns that swayed gently whenever the breeze slipped through. Fireflies hovered here, too, their golden light drifting slowly through the air. Some floated near his face, glowing just long enough for him to see the faint shape of their wings before fading back into shadow. He sat down on a fallen branch at the edge of the clearing, folding his hands in his lap. The forest seemed to breathe around him. Each firefly's glow felt like a heartbeat, rising and fading in turn, creating a rhythm that blended seamlessly with his own. He followed their pattern with his eyes until he felt almost hypnotized. Each flicker of light, another gentle reminder that life didn't have to move fast to be beautiful. Looking up, he noticed a cluster of stars framed perfectly by a gap in the trees. Their arrangement caught his attention. It wasn't a constellation he knew well, but it didn't matter. To him, it looked like a scatter of lanterns placed carefully in the sky, guiding travelers through the dark. He wondered how many people before him had stood in this same spot, looking up at these same stars. The thought made him feel connected, as though he was part of a long line of dreamers who had walked these woods at night. His mind wandered further, imagining Mabel walking beside him. She would have gasped at the fireflies, tried to name each one, and probably spun in a circle just to catch the light dancing around her. The image made him smile softly, and he whispered to the night, "She would have loved this." The words didn't echo. They simply dissolved into the forest, absorbed into the quiet, as though the trees themselves were listening. He leaned back slightly, resting his hands behind him on the branch, and tilted his face towards the stars. His eyes blinked slower now, his thoughts drifting like clouds across the sky. He wasn't tired, not yet, but he felt a drowsy kind of peace settling into him, the kind that reminded him of the moments just before sleep, when the world softened at the edges. The forest around him seemed endless yet safe. Each rustle of leaves, each faint flutter of wings, was a part of a song written only for nights like this. And as he sat there, letting himself drift further into that song, he realized he didn't need to understand it. It was enough simply to listen. And so he did. The mystery shack was quiet, resting beneath the blanket of night. Its wooden walls creaked softly every so often as the cool evening air settled in, but otherwise the house seemed to be holding its breath, wrapped in stillness. Out in the forest, crickets sang their steady song, and from the porch, the faint hum of the neon sign glowed against the darkness. Above it all stretched the endless night sky, sprinkled with stars that seemed to shine brighter in Gravity Falls than anywhere else. Some shimmered faintly, others burned sharp and steady, and together they painted in the heavens in a way that made the shack feel small, but comfortingly so. On the roof, lying across the uneven shingles, was Dipper. He had climbed up the way he usually did, careful not to make too much noise, mindful of Mabel sleeping in the attic below. Now he lay on his back, with his arms tucked behind his head, his cap tilted slightly beside him. The wood beneath him was cool, warmed in places where the day's sunlight still lingered faintly, but mostly smooth and familiar beneath his shoulders. The stars stretched above him in endless rivers. Dipper's eyes traced them slowly, patiently, as if he had all the time in the world to connect them into shapes of his own. He whispered to himself the words meant only for the night. "There's Orion, and that's Cassiopeia, I think." His voice was soft, almost a sigh, as he let his mind wander through the constellations. Next to him lay a notebook. Not the journal this time, but a smaller one, half filled with sketches and notes. The pages caught the faint silver glow of the moon as he flipped it open. There were rough outlines of constellations, little arrows pointing to clusters of stars, and notes scribbled in his neat but slightly cramped handwriting. Possible patterns? One page asked. Another had a drawing of a star map marked with question marks where he wasn't sure. But tonight Dipper wasn't in a rush to solve anything. He wasn't tracing codes or hunting for hidden meanings. Instead, he rested the notebook gently on his chest and simply stared upward, letting the night sky wash over him. He had spent so much of his time looking for answers in the stars, but tonight he was content to just look. A breeze drifted over the roof, lifting a few loose strands of his hair. He closed his eyes briefly, breathing in the cool air. It carried the sense of pine and old wood, mixed faintly with the smell of the neon sign's warm buzz. The combination was oddly comforting, homey in its own strange way. When he opened his eyes again, the stars seemed even brighter. The Milky Way curved above like a soft river of light, spilling across the heavens in a trail so wide he couldn't see its beginning or end. It was endless. And that thought didn't scare him. If anything, it made him feel safe, like the stars would always be there, patient and steady, no matter what happened in the world below. He tilted his head slightly, imagining how Mabel would react if she were awake and lying here beside him. She'd probably name the constellation something silly like the Llama of Destiny, or the ice cream cone that never melts. He smiled softly at the thought, his chest warming with quiet affection. Even when she wasn't awake, Mabel had a way of making the night feel brighter just by existing. For a moment he sat up, pulling his knees to his chest. The roof gave him a wide view of the forest stretching beyond the shack, a sea of dark green shadows swaying gently in the breeze. Here and there, little glimmers of fireflies moved between the trees, their golden lights flickering like tiny, drifting stars of their own. It felt as though the world above and the world below were mirrors of each other, each reflecting the same quiet beauty. Leaning back down again, Dipper rested his notebook to the side and folded his arms beneath his head once more. His heartbeat slowed in time with his breathing. The cool shingles pressed against his back. The stars pressed against his gaze, and in between he felt himself floating, caught gently between the earth and the sky. And there, with the vast night spread above him, Dipper let his thoughts wander softly, like clouds drifting without direction. The longer Dipper lay on the roof, the more the stars seemed to come alive. At first they had been scattered points of light, far away and distant. But the more he watched, the more he noticed little details, how some glimmered with a faint blue, while others shone golden white, how one seemed to pulse gently, like it was breathing, how the Milky Way wasn't just a streak of light, but 1,000 tiny sparks woven into a ribbon across the heavens. His eyes followed one star in particular. It blinked faintly and then steadied, as though signaling just to him. He raised his hand and pointed to it, tracing a line from it to another, then another, until he had formed a shape in his mind, a triangle with a faint tail like an arrow pointing toward the horizon. He smiled at the little constellation of his own making, knowing it wouldn't appear on any official star map, but maybe that was the point. The sky belonged to everyone, not just to books or charts. He let his arm fall back against the roof, listening, as the shingles gave a soft creak beneath his weight. From below, the mystery shack exhaled its own nighttime sounds, the quiet ticking of the old sign, the occasional rattle of loose wood. None of it disturbed him. If anything, it made the roof feel even more comfortable, like lying in a hammock, tied between the stars and the earth. A small sound stirred near the trees, pulling his attention for a moment. Perhaps a raccoon, rustling through fallen leaves, maybe an owl shifting on its perch. The forest was alive even at night, but not in a threatening way. Its movements were part of the same rhythm as the stars above, a reminder that life continued quietly, whether or not anyone was watching. Dipper exhaled softly and let the noise fade into the background, just another piece of the night's lullaby. Reaching for his notebook again, he flipped it open to a fresh page. Instead of notes or symbols, he began to sketch the triangle constellation he had just imagined. His pencil moved slowly, gently, the graphite whispering against the paper. He wasn't aiming for precision. He was simply recording what he saw, the way it felt, to notice something small and new in a sky that had been there forever. When he finished the outline, he stared at it for a moment, then wrote a simple note beneath. My own constellation, just for tonight. He closed the notebook softly and set it aside, folding his hands across his chest. The stars above continued their patient glow. It was easy to imagine that they weren't just distant suns, but lanterns hung by unseen keepers, watching over the world with steady care. Dipper liked that thought. The idea that no matter how strange or uncertain life could be, the stars remained constant and unmoving, guiding lights across the endless night. A yawn escaped him before he realized it. His eyes blinked slowly, the edges of his vision softening with the first hints of drowsiness. He shifted slightly on the roof, turning his head to rest on the crook of his arm. The shingles pressed gently against his cheek, cool and familiar. The night breeze brushed across his face, carrying the faint scent of pine. Everything about the moment invited stillness. He thought briefly of Mabel again, tucked inside the attic with wattles curled against her. She would have wanted to be here, he knew, laughing, pointing out stars, giving them names that made no sense, but somehow made the night feel brighter. He imagined her voice beside him, chattering excitedly, and even though the roof was quiet, the memory made him feel as if she were right there after all. His gaze returned to the Milky Way, flowing above like a silver river. He wondered where it began, where it ended, and if the answers even mattered. Sometimes mysteries weren't there to be solved. Sometimes they were there to be experienced, to remind him of how vast the world was and how small yet special his place in it could feel. And so Dipper lay there, watching, breathing, drifting. The night deepened, and with it the stars seemed to grow brighter, as if the darkness itself had polished the sky to a clearer shine. Dipper let his breathing slow until it matched the rhythm of the world around him. His chest rose and fell gently, each exhale blending with the sigh of wind brushing across the treetops. He folded his hands behind his head again, letting the notebook rest forgotten at his side. Above, the stars blurred slightly as his eyes softened. He didn't fight the heaviness that touched his eyelids. Instead, he let himself drift between wakefulness and dream, where thoughts felt less like puzzles and more like drifting shapes. In this half-awake state, the constellations began to take on new forms. The Big Dipper stretched wider, its edges glowing faintly like a lantern floating above him. Cassiopeia curved into a gentle crown, delicate and welcoming. The stars connected themselves without his help, forming patterns and figures that seemed alive, moving slowly across the dark canvas of the sky. He imagined the forest below joining the sky above. The fireflies rose into the air like sparks, floating higher and higher until they mingled with the constellations, their golden glow filling the gaps between the stars. For a moment, it was impossible to tell where the forest ended and the sky began. It was all one endless ocean of light, and he was lying in the middle of it. The thought made him smile softly. Gravity Falls was full of mysteries, strange creatures, hidden codes, secrets tucked into every corner. But lying here, Dipper realized that the greatest mystery of all might be this simple beauty. No monsters, no danger, no riddles to solve. Just the quiet wonder of a night sky, vast and endless, and the comfort of being small beneath it. He turned slightly onto his side, propping his cheek on his arm. From this angle, he could see the outline of the forest stretching into the horizon. The treetops swayed gently, their tips catching the silver light of the moon. Beyond them, the mountains rose like shadows against the stars, steady and unchanging. He imagined them as ancient guardians, watching over the valley through countless nights like this one. The roof creaked softly beneath him as he shifted. The sound reminded him of the shack itself, old, crooked, and full of strange corners, but somehow always dependable. It was the kind of place that felt alive, and lying here on the roof, he felt like he was part of that life. The shack, the forest, the stars. They all blended together into one steady presence that held him quietly in place. He let his gaze drift back upward, focusing on one star brighter than the rest. He whispered to it, though he didn't know why. "Good night." His voice was quiet, but saying it made his chest feel lighter, as if he had shared something important. The star, steady and unmoving, gave no reply. But in its stillness, Dipper found the comfort of an answer anyway. A yawn escaped him again, longer this time. His body sank deeper into the roof, his arms relaxing at his sides. His eyes closed briefly, then opened again, the stars blurring into soft points of light. He didn't mind the blurring. It made them look even gentler, like lanterns seen through water. In the quiet, he thought of tomorrow. The day would bring new puzzles, new adventures, maybe even new challenges. But tonight wasn't about any of that. Tonight was about resting, about letting the world be as it was without trying to uncover its secrets. For once, he allowed himself to simply be a boy lying on a roof, watching the stars. And as that thought settled, so did he. The night sky above the shack was steady now, as though it had settled into its own rhythm. The stars twinkled softly, patient and unchanging, while the moon hung like a quiet lantern, casting pale light across the shingles where Dipper lay. Everything about the moment seemed designed for rest, the cool air, the faint creak of the roof, the chorus of crickets that never wavered. Dipper blinked slowly, his eyes heavy but content. Each time he opened them again, the stars seemed a little softer, as if the night itself was wrapping them in layers of calm. He no longer tried to trace constellations or draw shapes in the sky. Instead, he let the stars be what they were, faraway lights that had burned for longer than he could imagine, shining quietly above him. A breeze drifted over the roof, cool and gentle, carrying the smell of pine. It brushed his hair lightly and rustled the notebook at his side. He placed a hand over it to keep the pages from fluttering, then left it there, resting gently. The journal wasn't important tonight. The stars didn't ask to be written down. They asked only to be seen. His gaze wandered toward the treetops again. Fireflies still blinked here and there, their glow weaving through the branches like living sparks. They looked like pieces of the sky that had drifted down for a visit, reminders that even the earth had its own stars to share. He followed one with his eyes until it disappeared into the shadows, leaving only the steady lights above. With another long, slow exhale, Dipper stretched his arms out beside him and let them fall loosely against the shingles. His body felt heavier now, pleasantly weighted, as though the roof itself were cradling him. His thoughts, usually quick and sharp, were quiet tonight. They moved slowly, like leaves floating in water, drifting without urgency. He thought of Mabel one last time, sleeping soundly in the attic below. He pictured her bundled in blankets, Waddles snuggled close, dreaming of whatever bright and colorful worlds her mind invented. The image warmed him. No matter how wide and strange the universe felt, it always came back to moments like that. His sister, their little attic, the family they had built in this odd, crooked house. Turning his face toward the stars again, Dipper whispered, "Good night, Gravity Falls." The words left his lips softly, blending into the cool air. There was no echo, no reply, but he didn't need one. The town, the forest, the stars above, they were listening in their own quiet way. His eyelids grew heavier with each blink. The stars blurred into glowing shapes, then into soft silver haze. His breathing slowed, deep and steady, matching the rhythm of the forest around him. For a few more heartbeats, he lingered in that space between waking and sleep, floating gently on the edge of dreams. Then, with the night sky holding watch above, Dipper's eyes closed at last. The world became quiet, and the boy on the shack's roof drifted into peaceful rest, carried by the same calm that had filled the forest, the sky, and the stars themselves. And above him, the universe kept shining, endless, patient, and serene. The Mystery Shack had a personality of its own during the day, creaky, noisy, crowded with tourists, and echoing with Stan's booming voice as he sold trinkets no one needed. But at night, it became something entirely different. Its quirks softened. Its clutter turned quiet. The house seemed to exhale into the dark, settling into a slower rhythm that only those awake at this hour could notice. Dipper padded softly down the attic stairs, careful not to wake Mabel. She stirred once in her sleep, pulling her blanket tighter around her shoulders, but soon returned to her gentle snoring. Waddles let out a faint grunt and rolled onto his side. Dipper smiled, then tiptoed on. The stairs groaned as he moved, but the sounds were familiar, like the shack speaking in a language only he and Mabel understood. Every creak had a character. One step near the middle of the staircase had a long, low groan, while another near the bottom squeaked sharply as if surprised to be stepped on. He lifted his feet carefully, listening to the house's voice as he descended into the hallway. The hall was dim, lit only by the faint glow of moonlight through dusty windows. Shadows stretched across the floorboards, warped and crooked like the house itself. The air carried the smell of old wood and faint dust, mingled with the sweet aroma of pine drifting in through a half-open window. Dipper paused by a framed picture on the wall, Stan grinning with exaggerated pride, one arm around Seuss and the other pointing toward a tourist sign. The photo looked almost silly in the moonlight, Stan's grin oddly exaggerated, but Dipper found it comforting. It reminded him that even in all of its strangeness, the shack was still a place of family and familiarity. He moved on, letting his fingers trail along the wooden wall as he passed. The grooves and knots of the wood were rough beneath his touch, grounding him in the moment. The hall led toward the gift shop, and as he approached, the smell of old paper and plastic wafted faintly toward him. Pushing open the door, he stepped inside. The gift shop was quiet now, its shelves lined with dusty curiosities and souvenirs that no one was awake to buy. Plush toys stared from their perches, their button eyes catching faint glimmers of moonlight. Snow globes rested silently, tiny scenes trapped in glass, the glitter inside them unmoving until touched. Even the cash register sat quietly, its keys dark, his drawer closed tight. Dipper wandered slowly between the aisles, each step deliberate, as though he were a visitor in a museum of stillness. He reached out to straighten a crooked postcard stand, listening to the faint squeak it made as it spun lazily. He paused to tap a plastic bobblehead, watching its oversized head nod up and down in endless agreement before falling still again. It was strange, he thought. How different the shack felt without voices filling it. By day, the clutter felt overwhelming, almost chaotic. But now, in the quiet, each object seemed to rest in its place, holding a kind of secret dignity. The mystery shack wasn't asleep exactly. It was awake in another way, softer and slower, whispering its stories instead of shouting them. Dipper made his way toward the display of oddities, shrunken heads, jars with cloudy liquid. Authentic artifacts that were almost certainly fake. He leaned closer to one of the jars, the glass cold against his fingertips. The object inside, a twisted shape that could have been a creature or just a cleverly sculpted toy, looked less frightening in the moonlight, almost lonely. "Not so scary now, huh?" he whispered softly, his voice barely above a breath. The jar gave no answer, but in its silence it seemed less like a trick and more like a companion, resting quietly in the dim. He continued through the room, letting his eyes linger on each strange piece. They all seemed to hum with quiet energy, as though waiting for someone to notice them when the crowds were gone. And in that moment, Dipper realized maybe that was what made the shack feel alive. Not just the mysteries it hid, but the way even its oddest objects seemed to carry their own secret kind of presence. And with that thought, he pressed further into the shack, the night guiding his steps. Dipper left the gift shop behind, easing the door shut so it only gave a soft click. The hallway stretched ahead, darker now, with fewer windows to let in moonlight. His steps were slower, careful not to disturb the fragile quiet that seemed to coat the walls. He found himself drawn toward Grunkle Stan's office. The door was half open, and a faint line of silver light stretched across the floorboards inside. Dipper hesitated a moment, listening. The house was silent, save for the occasional sigh of wind brushing against the roof. He pushed the door gently and stepped inside. Stan's office was cluttered even more than the gift shop. Piles of papers sat on the desk, half buried under magazines, receipts, and old envelopes. A green banker's lamp rested on the corner, its shade catching just enough moonlight to glow faintly. A safe loomed against the wall, locked tight, its dial reflecting a cold gleam. Dipper ran his fingers across the edge of the desk, careful not to disturb the stacks of paper. He imagined Stan sitting here earlier in the evening, counting bills or muttering about tourists, his chair creaking in protest beneath him. Now the chair stood empty, its back tilted slightly as if Stan had only just left. On the wall hung framed certificates, some real, some clearly fakes, world's best salesman in crooked lettering. Official license of paranormal expertise, written in a font too cartoonish to be official. Dipper smiled faintly. In the quiet, the fakes didn't feel like lies. They felt like stories the shack told about itself, but each one adding to its odd charm. He moved past the desk toward a tall filing cabinet, its drawers shut but slightly misaligned. One bore a crooked label that simply read, "Important-ish." Another was marked, "Do not open. Seriously." Dipper brushed the labels with his fingertips, curiosity tugging at him, but he didn't open the drawers. Tonight wasn't about uncovering secrets. It was about noticing the way they waited, patient and quiet, behind closed metal. A draft slipped through the window near the corner, ruffling a stack of old pamphlets. Dipper leaned closer, catching a glimpse of one on top. Its faded cover read, "Come to the Mystery Shack. World's greatest oddities await." The picture showed a younger version of Stan, arms spread wide, welcoming visitors. In the stillness, Dipper could almost hear Stan's voice echoing through the years, loud and cheerful, trying to sell wonder. The office seemed less like a place of business now and more like a memory caught in time. Every object, the desk lamp, the safe, the scattered papers, felt like a piece of Stan's life left to rest until morning. Dipper let out a slow breath, almost a sigh, and stepped back into the hall. He wandered further, toward the back rooms most tourists never saw. The wooden floorboards were uneven here, some bowing slightly, others rising just enough to catch his socks as he walked. He steadied himself against the wall, his hand brushing old wallpaper that peeled at the edges. One door creaked open to reveal storage room. Inside, shelves towered toward the ceiling, stacked with boxes, crates, and more of Stan's odd collectibles. The air smelled of old cardboard and faint cedar, a dry and papery scent that filled the space. Dipper stepped inside. His eyes roamed the shelves, cracked jars, boxes marked question marks, bundles of rope, a moth-eaten banner that read, Shack Fest, 1997. Cobwebs hung in the corners, delicate threads swaying in the slight draft. He reached out to a shelf and touched a glass dome containing a single dusty feather. The label beneath it claimed, Phoenix Feather, extremely dangerous. In the pale moonlight it looked ordinary, yet somehow the label made it feel grand, like a treasure hidden in plain sight. Other objects surrounded it, a cracked mirror wrapped in twine, a jar filled with marbles that glowed faintly as though catching stray starlight, a stack of vinyl records whose covers promised mystic sounds of the supernatural. Dipper traced the lettering of one record before setting it back, careful not to disturb the stack. This room, more than any other, felt alive in its stillness. Each shelf was a story waiting to be told, and tonight they whispered softly, their voices gentle and patient. Dipper listened without needing to understand, letting the weight of the shack's collected oddities sink into him like a lullaby made of mystery. And after a long pause, he moved deeper still toward rooms even darker, where the shack seemed to grow quieter with every step. The further Dipper went, the quieter the shack seemed to become, as though each step carried him deeper into its sleeping heart. The floorboards here were older, less polished, with edges that curled and splintered like the wrinkles of a very old face. His footsteps softened instinctively, almost respectful, as if he knew he was entering a part of the house rarely disturbed. He turned down a narrow hallway, the kind tourists never saw. The ceiling dipped low, and the walls leaned inward ever so slightly, giving the feeling of being inside a secret passage. Dust floated lazily in the air, caught in a beam of moonlight spilling from a small high window. The light looked almost solid, like a pale ribbon stretched across the dark corridor. A door at the end caught his attention. Its wood was darker than the others, carved with faint grooves that time had worn smooth. When he pressed his hand against it, the surface was cool, the grain rough beneath his fingers. The knob turned reluctantly, squeaking in protest, but after a moment it gave way and the door creaked open. Inside was another storage space, larger than the one before, but quieter, more hushed, as though it held its breath. The air smelled faintly of cedar and dust, mixed with something sweeter like old candle wax. Shelves lined the walls, but these weren't filled with trinkets for sale. Instead, they held boxes with no labels, old furniture draped in cloth, and crates nailed shut with rusting nails. Dipper stepped carefully across the floor, the boards groaning beneath his weight. One crate near the center had cracked open, its contents spilling slightly into the moonlight. He crouched down, running his hand over the fragments. Bits of glass, a curled photograph, and something metallic that caught the faint light. It was only an old coin, dulled by time, but in this room it looked like treasure. He rose slowly and wandered toward a tall shape covered in a white sheet. His hand brushed the fabric, cool and slightly rough, before he pulled it gently aside. Beneath was an antique mirror, its frame ornate with carved swirls and faded gold paint. The glass was foggy, warped with age, but it reflected enough light to show a dim version of his own face staring back. For a moment, Dipper stood in silence, gazing at his faint reflection. The mirror seemed heavier than it looked, as if it carried with it the weight of all the people who had once stood before it. He whispered softly, "Hello?" His reflection gave no reply, of course, but in the stillness, the words seemed to linger, like a voice carried gently through the house's walls. He moved on, lifting a corner of another cloth to reveal a wooden rocking chair. Its paint had long since chipped, but the curves of the wood were graceful, almost elegant. Dipper gave it the lightest push, and the chair rocked once, twice, before falling still again. The soft creak it made echoed like a lullaby in the dark. Deeper still, he found a small trunk with brass fittings. He didn't open it. He only rested his hand on the lid, feeling the cool metal beneath his fingertips. Whatever lay inside could wait. Tonight wasn't about discovery. It was about noticing the way the shack kept its mysteries tucked gently away, like dreams folded in a drawer. He let his gaze wander upward. The rafters were thick with cobwebs, delicate threads glinting faintly in the moonlight. A moth drifted lazily through the beams, its wings glowing pale as it fluttered silently past. The sight made Dipper feel oddly calm. Even here, in the shack's hidden spaces, life went on gently, unhurried. Stepping back into the hallway, he let the door close quietly behind him. The sound of the latch clicking into place felt like the shack itself whispering goodnight. And so he walked further still, toward the attic storage above the main hall, where shadows deepened and the house's voice grew softer than ever. The hallway narrowed again as Dipper climbed the last set of creaking stairs. The attic storage above the main hall wasn't a place he visited often, but tonight it called to him with its quiet pull. Each step upward groaned under his weight, the sound stretching into the stillness like the shack's way of marking his passage. At the top, he pushed open a small wooden hatch. Dust fluttered down, glittering faintly in the moonlight, and the air grew cooler as it brushed against his face. He hoisted himself into the space, careful not to knock over the stacks of boxes piled around the entrance. The attic was dim and hushed, filled with the smell of aged wood and paper. The slanted roof pressed down low, and rafters crossed overhead like the bones of some sleeping giant. Moonlight filtered through narrow cracks in the wood, spilling silver lines across the floor. Dipper crouched as he moved through the space, brushing past draped sheets and boxes stacked unevenly. His fingertips trailed across the dusty surfaces, some rough, some smooth with polish faded long ago. Every item here felt forgotten, but not abandoned. They waited quietly, like old friends who knew their stories would one day be remembered again. He paused at a stack of boxes marked only with faded handwriting. The words were smudged, unreadable, but the care in the lettering made him smile. Even mysteries left in storage carried the imprint of someone's hand. He let his fingers rest against the lid, then moved on. Near the center of the attic stood a wooden chest with brass hinges, the kind of chest that seemed to belong in fairy tales. Its surface was scarred with scratches, but its presence gave the room a quiet gravity, as though it held the shack's deepest dreams. Dipper didn't try to open it. He simply sat beside it, resting his back against the cool wood. The chest didn't need to reveal its secrets tonight. It was enough that it was there, steady and silent. From this spot, he could see through a thin crack in the wall. Beyond it, the forest stretched endlessly, its treetops bathed in moonlight. Fireflies drifted lazily over the clearing, their glow like tiny stars that had fallen to earth. The sight made him feel safe, as though the world itself was tucking him in. He leaned his head back against the chest, listening. The attic creaked faintly with each breath of wind outside, the wood shifting like the shack was sighing in its sleep. Far below, a clock ticked somewhere, its rhythm muffled but steady, like a heartbeat echoing through the wall. For a long moment, Dipper let himself simply exist there, between the past and the present, between the shack's secrets and its quiet comforts. His eyelids grew heavy, his thoughts softer with each passing minute. Finally, he pushed himself gently to his feet and made his way back down through the hatch. The stairs groaned beneath him once more, but the sound felt familiar now, like a lullaby sung in the shack's own voice. When he reached the attic bedroom, Mabel was still curled in her blankets, her soft snores filling the room. Waddles gave a faint grunt as Dipper slipped back inside, then settled again without stirring. Dipper crawled into bed, the mattress dipping slightly under his weight. He pulled the covers over himself and let out a long, quiet breath. Around him, the mystery shack seemed to wrap itself in silence, its quirks and mysteries tucked safely away for the night. As his eyes closed, Dipper realized the shack wasn't just strange or mysterious, it was comforting. A place that watched over him even in its stillest hours. And with that thought, he drifted into sleep, his dreams carrying him deeper into the calm of the night. And the mystery shack, with all its secrets, slept peacefully too. The hallway narrowed again as Dipper climbed the last set of creaking stairs. The attic storage above the main hall wasn't a place he visited often, but tonight it called to him with its quiet pull. Each step upward groaned under his weight, the sound stretching into the stillness like the shack's way of marking his passage. At the top, he pushed open a small wooden hatch. Dust fluttered down, glittering faintly in the moonlight, and the air grew cooler as it brushed against his face. He hoisted himself into the space, careful not to knock over the stacks of boxes piled around the entrance. The attic was dim and hushed, filled with the smell of aged wood and paper. The slanted roof pressed down low, and rafters crossed overhead like the bones of some sleeping giant. Moonlight filtered through narrow cracks in the wood, spilling silver lines across the floor. Dipper crouched as he moved through the space, brushing past draped sheets and boxes stacked unevenly. His fingertips trailed across the dusty surfaces, some rough, some smooth with polish faded long ago. Every item here felt forgotten but not abandoned. They waited quietly, like old friends who knew their stories would one day be remembered again. He paused at a stack of boxes marked only with faded handwriting. The words were smudged, unreadable, but the care in the lettering made him smile. Even mysteries left in storage carried the imprint of someone's hand. He let his fingers rest against the lid, then moved on. Near the center of the attic stood a wooden chest with brass hinges, the kind of chest that seemed to belong in fairy tales. Its surface was scarred with scratches, but its presence gave the room a quiet gravity, as though it held the shack's deepest dreams. Dipper didn't try to open it. He simply sat beside it, resting his back against the cool wood. The chest didn't need to reveal its secrets tonight. It was enough that it was there, steady and silent. From this spot, he could see through a thin crack in the wall. Beyond it, the forest stretched endlessly, its treetops bathed in moonlight. Fireflies drifted lazily over the clearing, their glow like tiny stars that had fallen to earth. The sight made him feel safe, as though the world itself was tucking him in. He leaned his head back against the chest, listening. The attic creaked faintly with each breath of wind outside, the wood shifting like the shack was sighing in its sleep. Far below, a clock ticked somewhere, its rhythm muffled but steady, like a heartbeat echoing through the walls. For a long moment, Dipper let himself simply exist there, between the past and the present, between the shack's secrets and its quiet comforts. His eyelids grew heavy, his thoughts softer with each passing minute. Finally, he pushed himself gently to his feet and made his way back down through the hatch. The stairs groaned beneath him once more, but the sound felt familiar now, like a lullaby, sung in the shack's own voice. When he reached the attic bedroom, Mabel was still curled in her blankets, her soft snores filling the room. Waddles gave a faint grunt as Dipper slipped back inside, then settled again without stirring. Dipper crawled into bed, the mattress dipping slightly under his weight. He pulled the covers over himself and let out a long, quiet breath. Around him, the mystery shack seemed to wrap itself in silence, its quirks and mysteries tucked safely away for the night. As his eyes closed, Dipper realized the shack wasn't just strange or mysterious, it was comforting. A place that watched over him even in its stillest hours. And with that thought, he drifted into sleep, his dreams carrying him deeper into the calm of the night. And the mystery shack, with all its secrets, slept peacefully too. The shack was quiet again, its night settled deep, but Dipper's thoughts had not yet slowed enough for sleep. He sat at the small desk by the attic window, a notebook open before him, the dim glow of a lamp spilling golden light across the page. Mabel slept soundly behind him, bundled in blankets, her breaths steady and soft. Waddles let out a faint snort now and then, rolling over as if to remind the world of his presence. Dipper dipped his pen into the ink and began to write. He titled the page simply, Letters to Mabel. The words weren't meant for her to read right now, and they were more like whispers he needed to set free, thoughts too quiet for the day but too alive to be ignored at night. He pressed the tip of the pen to the paper and began. Dear Mabel, he wrote, the letter steady and careful. You're asleep right now, probably dreaming about glitter rainbows or giant sweaters that hug back. I wish I could see inside your dreams just once. I bet they're the brightest places in the universe. He paused, listening to her gentle snores, and smiled before continuing. I know I worry a lot, sometimes too much. I think about mysteries, clues, puzzles, like they'll all disappear if I don't solve them right away. But then I see you laugh, and for a moment I forget all of it. You remind me there's more to life than figuring things out. Sometimes it's enough just to be here. The pen scratched softly against the paper, the sound blending with the hum of crickets outside. Tonight I walked through the shack while you slept. Every room felt different, like the house changes its mood when the world is quiet. I think you'd like it. You'd probably name all the cobwebs and give the rocking chair a face. I almost heard you laughing in the hall, even though I knew you were right here, sleeping peacefully. Maybe that's just how strong your voice is in this place. It echoes even when you're silent. He set the pen down for a moment, stretching his fingers. His gaze drifted toward the window where the moon hung low above the trees. Its pale glow seemed to nod in agreement with every word he wrote. Picking the pen back up, he continued. I don't say it enough, but I'm glad you're here with me, Mabel. Gravity Falls would be way too big, too strange without you. I know I act like I've got to solve everything on my own, but the truth is, I couldn't do any of it without you. Not really. You make all of this feel like more than just mysteries. You make it feel like home. His writing slowed as he finished the line. He looked back at her, curled up on her side, a faint smile tugging at her lips, even in sleep. Maybe she really was dreaming of sweaters and glitter. Or maybe she was dreaming of the same stars he'd seen earlier, only brighter. Dipper closed the notebook softly, resting his hand on the cover. He didn't need to write everything tonight. The letters could grow one page at a time, like a collection of quiet moments meant only for the two of them. And with that, he leaned back in his chair, letting the lamp's glow flicker across the desk, and prepared to write again. The lamp hummed faintly, its light steady but soft, casting long shadows across the desk. Dipper opened the notebook again, smoothing the page with his palm. His pen hovered for a moment before dipping into the ink, and then the words began to flow once more. "Dear Mabel," he wrote again, starting fresh. "Do you remember when we first came to Gravity Falls? I thought of it as just another summer in a strange town, full of puzzles I needed to figure out. But you saw something different right away. You saw friends waiting to be made, sweaters waiting to be knitted, jokes waiting to be told. You always see the fun before the fear. I don't know how you do that, but I'm grateful you do." He paused, remembering that first week, the bus ride, the crooked sign for the Mystery Shack, Stan's booming voice, and Mabel's laughter echoing through the halls as if she had always belonged here. That memory made the corner of his mouth tug upward. "I think sometimes I get so focused on what's hiding in the shadows that I forget to notice the light. But you notice both. You make the scary parts less scary, and the weird parts feel a little more ours. Even when we're in the middle of something completely impossible, you make it feel like an adventure instead of a danger." The words came easier now, flowing in steady lines across the page. He glanced over at her sleeping form, her chest rising and falling in calm rhythm, and kept going. "Like that time in the forest, when we heard strange noises and I was convinced it was some kind of monster stalking us. I had my flashlight, my journal, my theories all lined up, but you just grabbed my arm and said, 'Maybe it's a lonely gnome who wants a friend.' I thought you were joking. But when it turned out to actually be gnomes, you weren't even surprised. You just laughed and tried to braid one's beard. That's the difference between us. I see danger. You see possibilities. And somehow your way always makes more sense in the end." He chuckled quietly under his breath at the memory, then let his smile fade into something gentler as he dipped the pen again. "I don't say this out loud, but I need you, Mabel, more than I let on. You make me braver just by being around. When I'm too deep in my own head, you remind me to breathe. When I worry too much about what's next, you remind me that now matters too. And when everything feels too big, you're the reason it doesn't crush me. You carry the kind of light no mystery can dim." He leaned back in his chair, tapping the pen lightly against the desk. The words on the page glowed faintly in the lamplight, their meaning quiet but certain. A breeze slipped in through the window, stirring the curtains and rustling the paper. Dipper set the pen down for a moment, closing his eyes as the cool air brushed his face. He thought of how often Mabel opened windows just to let the stars in, and the memory made him laugh softly. Opening his eyes again, he wrote a final line for the night. "I don't know if you'll ever read these letters, but even if you don't, I think you'll still know what they say. You've always known my heart better than I do." He closed the notebook gently, resting his palm on its cover. Behind him, Mabel stirred in her sleep, murmuring something about sparkle dolphins, then fell quiet again. Dipper turned off the lamp, letting the attic dim into moonlight. The letters would wait, safe and steady, like the thoughts he carried for her always. The attic was hushed, filled only with the faint creak of the old house as it settled into the night. Dipper lit the lamp again, its glow spilling softly over the desk, and opened the notebook to a fresh page. His pen touched down with a sense of calm, the ink gliding steadily across the paper. "Dear Mabel," he began. the words forming in a rhythm that felt like breathing. I've been thinking about the future, about what happens after the summer ends, after we leave Gravity Falls. I know we'll go home, back to school, back to everything we've always known. But a part of me worries about what it'll feel like to leave this place behind. Will it fade into memory, like a dream you wake from too soon? Or will it stay with us as strong as it feels now? He paused, the pen hovering as his eyes wandered to the window. The moon still lingered above the trees, patient and unchanging, as if to remind him that some things remain even when time moves forward. He bent over the page again. I hope, when we're older, that you never lose the way you see the world. I hope you'll still laugh at the little things, like funny-shaped clouds or squirrels doing silly jumps. I hope you'll still carry glitter in your pockets just in case. I hope you'll still believe in magic, even when it hides itself, because you believing makes it real for the rest of us, too. The thought made him smile faintly. He could almost see her years from now, still decorating sweaters with buttons shaped like stars, still giving names to every pet or stuffed animal she came across. That image was so clearly Mabel that he had no doubt it would come true. And if you ever doubt yourself, he wrote softly, I want you to remember that you've always been the bravest person I know. Not because you fight monsters or solve puzzles, but because you never stop being yourself. You don't hide it. You don't shrink it down. You let the world see your heart, even when it's scary to do that. That's the kind of courage I wish I had more of. The pen scratched quietly in the silence, the words steady and sure. Sometimes I think people underestimate you because you laugh so much, or because you care about things they think don't matter. But I know better. I see the way you keep us together, the way you notice when someone feels small and you make them feel big again. I hope you never stop being that kind of person, and I hope I can always be there beside you, even when the world tries to pull us in different directions. Dipper stopped to stretch his fingers, rolling the pen between them. He glanced back at Mabel, who had rolled onto her back, arms stretched above her head, a tiny snore escaping her lips. Waddles, nestled at her side, twitched his legs as if dreaming of running. The sight filled Dipper with a warmth that pushed gently against the edges of his heart. Turning back to the notebook, he wrote a final line for this letter. Wherever we go, whatever happens next, I hope we never lose this. Me and you, side by side, chasing stars and stories. That's the adventure I care about most. He closed the notebook gently, his hand resting on the cover for a long moment, as if sealing the words not just into paper, but into the night itself. The shack creaked again, softer this time, as though it had overheard and was nodding in quiet agreement. The lamp's glow had softened, the oil inside burning lower now, casting the attic in a golden haze. Dipper rubbed his eyes, the weight of the night beginning to settle onto his shoulders. Still, he opened the notebook again, unwilling to let the quiet slip away without one more letter. The pen felt heavier in his hand, but his thoughts were gentle, steady as he leaned close to the page. Dear Mabel, he wrote slowly, the ink trailing like the edge of a dream. It's late. Maybe too late for writing, but I don't want this night to end without telling you a little more. You are still asleep behind me, and I can hear your breathing, soft and even. It's like a lullaby all on its own. Sometimes I think you don't even know how much calm you bring into a room, even when you're not trying. His handwriting grew a little looser, the letters leaning as fatigue tugged at him. But he kept going. Tonight I feel small in the best way. Not small like lost, but small like standing under a sky full of stars. It reminds me that the world is huge, mysterious, impossible to ever fully solve, and yet here we are, a part of it. and having you beside me makes it feel less overwhelming, more like a story I actually want to live inside of." He paused, letting the pen rest against the paper. His eyelids grew heavier with each moment, but his thoughts still drifted forward. "If you could hear me right now," he continued, "I'd tell you that you're my favorite part of every mystery. Not the answers, not the discoveries, not even the strange creatures we meet along the way, but you. You're the constant. The reminder that no matter how weird things get, we'll always have each other. I guess that's what I'm really writing down, that I don't just love Gravity Falls because of the secrets it holds. I love it because it gave me time with you." The attic was almost silent now, save for the faint creak of the wood and the rhythm of Mabel's sleep. Even the crickets outside seemed to have quieted, as if the whole forest was leaning in to listen. He dipped the pen once more and scrawled a final line, his hand slow, his eyes nearly closed. "Good night, Mabel. Sweet dreams. I'll see you in the morning." The ink glistened faintly before drying. Dipper set the pen down, gently closed the notebook, and slid it a little to the side of the desk. The lamp flickered, as if it too was ready to rest. He turned in his chair, finally pulling himself away from the desk, and carefully lay back down on his bed. From across the room, Mabel let out another soft snore, her blanket half slipped onto the floor. He smiled, tugged his own blanket close, and let his eyes close at last. And there, with the letters safe between the notebook's covers and his sister's steady breathing filling the room, Dipper drifted into dreams, carrying the warmth of his words with him. The attic had gone fully quiet now. The lamp's glow had long since faded, leaving only the pale silver of moonlight spilling in through the window. Dipper was tucked under his blanket, finally surrendered to sleep, his notebook resting closed on the desk beside him. The steady rhythm of Mabel's soft snores filled the room, accompanied by the faint little grunts of Waddles as he dreamed his own pig-sized dreams. As Dipper's breathing deepened, the edges of his waking thoughts blurred. The words he had written earlier, those quiet letters to Mabel, seemed to ripple outward, drifting into the gentle tides of dream. The attic around him faded, replaced by something softer, more fluid, like stepping into a painting that was still wet with color. He found himself standing in a wide meadow, the grass glowing faintly in the light of a sky filled with stars. But these weren't ordinary stars. They shimmered brighter than he'd ever seen, swaying gently as though they were alive, lanterns hung across the heavens by invisible strings. The air was warm, touched with the scent of pine and something sweet he couldn't quite name. Dipper looked down and saw that in his hand was his journal, not the real one, but a dream version, its cover glowing softly as if it were alive too. When he opened it, the pages fluttered on their own, each one blank, waiting. But instead of feeling pressure to solve or record anything, he felt calm. It was as though the journal was there not for mysteries, but for memories. Ahead of him, he heard laughter, a familiar, bubbling sound that made his heart ease. Mabel appeared across the meadow, her sweater glowing like a constellation all its own. She waved to him, bounding across the grass, as though she weighed nothing at all. Waddles trotted happily at her heels, leaving tiny glowing hoofprints behind that slowly faded into the dream. "Come on, Dipper," Mabel called, her voice echoing gently, like it carried both through the dream and through his heart. He didn't even think to hesitate. He closed the glowing journal and tucked it under his arm, then started walking toward her. Each step felt lighter than the last, until it was more like floating than walking, as if the meadow itself wanted him to reach her without effort. When they met in the middle of the field, Mabel grinned and took his hand. "See, I told you the stars were friendlier up close." She pointed upward where one of the stars dipped lower, glowing brighter as though it was listening. To his amazement, the star wobbled gently, then blinked at them like an eye. Dipper laughed, soft, breathy, the kind of laugh he only found in his safest moments. "You're right," he admitted. "Of course you are." Together they sat down in the grass, leaning back to gaze at the sky. The stars shifted slowly, not in random patterns, but in shapes. Dream constellations forming playful pictures. A sweater with arms that stretched forever. A pine tree that glowed brighter than the rest. Even a journal drawn in starlight, its pages fluttering open to reveal nothing but light. Dipper felt no need to question, no urgency to write, no mysteries clawing for his attention. Just stillness, just wonder, just his sister by his side. The dream settled around him like a blanket, the stars humming a lullaby that only dreams could sing. The meadow shifted around them, not with the jolt of something sudden, but with the slow, steady ease of a page being turned. One moment the grass was beneath them, and the next it melted into a winding forest path, where the trees glowed faintly as if their trunks were brushed with starlight. The air shimmered with soft colors, hues of blue and violet that moved like water, and everything carried the hush of a lullaby. Dipper looked around in wonder. Each tree had lantern-like blossoms glowing along its branches, casting gentle circles of light onto the path. Mabel skipped ahead, her hair bouncing, her laughter carrying like a bell. Waddles waddled happily behind her, snuffling curiously at every glowing plant, as though the dream forest was filled with snacks only he could find. "This place feels alive," Dipper said, almost whispering so as not to disturb the quiet magic. His voice didn't echo here. Instead, it melted right into the glow of the trees, as if the forest itself was listening kindly. They continued walking together, and the path slowly widened into a clearing where a river flowed. But it wasn't an ordinary river. The water was like liquid silver, shining brighter than moonlight, rippling with colors that seemed to hum faintly. When the current moved, it created music, soft notes, gentle and harmonious, like a lullaby born from the water itself. Mabel gasped in delight, crouching down to dip her hands into the stream. Instead of splashing, the water rippled outward in waves of glowing patterns, hearts, stars, even tiny glittering dolphins. "Look, Dipper." "It makes pictures for us," she said, clapping her hands. He knelt beside her, letting his fingers trail through the water too. The river responded by painting pine tree patterns in its glow, one after another, as though it recognized him. He smiled softly, watching the shimmering shapes. "It's like it knows who we are," he murmured. Mabel nudged him with her shoulder, her grin wide. "Of course it does. We're the Pines twins. Even dream rivers remember us." Waddles oinked approvingly, his snout dipping into the water. Instantly, the river responded with floating, pig-shaped constellations that bubbled up from the current, glowing like tiny lanterns before drifting into the air. Mabel laughed so hard she nearly toppled into the water, while Dipper shook his head with a smile that lingered even as he tried to stifle it. The river's song shifted, softening even further as if it was guiding them onward. Across the clearing, the path continued, bathed in gentle light. Without needing to say anything, Dipper and Mabel rose, following the glowing trail together, Waddles trotting faithfully at their heels. The air was cool but not cold, fragrant but not heavy, carrying the sense of safety that only dreams could hold. Every step felt slower, lighter, as though the dream wanted to stretch time, keeping them wrapped in its calm embrace for as long as possible. And as the siblings walked deeper into the glowing forest, the stars above seemed to lean closer, their soft light spilling between the branches, weaving into the very ground beneath their feet. The forest path wound gently downward, the glow of the river fading behind them, until Dipper and Mabel found themselves approaching something familiar. The trees began to part, and there, bathed in silver light and dreamlike haze, stood the Mystery Shack. But it wasn't quite the same as in waking life. The crooked edges of the roof were softened, the walls glowing faintly like old wood polished by starlight. The neon sign above the door shimmered with gentle colors, not harsh or loud, but warm, like a beacon calling them home. Even the old weather vane on the roof seemed to hum faintly, as if the shack itself had joined in the dream's lullaby. Mabel's eyes lit up the way they always did when she saw something magical, even if it was something she already knew. "Dipper, it looks like the shack's been sprinkled with fairy dust," she whispered, though her voice carried like music through the dream air. Waddles let out a sleepy grunt of approval, already trotting toward the door. Dipper followed, his steps slow, taking in the way the shack seemed to breathe with light. "It feels safe," he murmured. Not eerie, not strange, not filled with shadows as it sometimes did late at night, but gentle, welcoming, like a storybook illustration of home. They pushed open the door, and instead of the usual cluttered gift shop, the inside of the shack stretched out like a dream version of memory. The walls were lined with glowing frames, each one holding a blurred but warm image of their summer. Sue's laughing while holding a half-broken gadget, Wendy tossing a can into the air with perfect aim, Stan counting coins at the register with a proud grin. Each picture glowed softly, not sharp or demanding, but hazy and calm, like remembering a happy moment just before falling asleep. Mabel spun slowly in the middle of the room, her sweater shimmering with the same glow as the shack. "It's like the shack is remembering us," she said. Dipper smiled, moving to one of the frames. The image showed the two of them sitting under a tree, Mabel holding a popsicle that was melting too fast while he scribbled in his journal. It wasn't a moment that would have stood out in the daytime, but here in the dream it glowed as if it were just as important as any great mystery. "I think it is," he replied softly. They wandered deeper into the shack, each room transformed into a soft echo of memory. The kitchen glowed with the scent of pancakes and hot syrup, the plates on the table warm as if waiting for them. The attic was filled with pillows and blankets that seemed to stretch endlessly, a place designed for sleepovers that never had to end. Even the gift shop, usually cluttered and chaotic, was arranged neatly, every shelf glowing like it had been dusted with stars. Mabel leaned her head against Dipper's shoulder as they walked, her voice quieter now. "You know what this means, right? The shack loves us back." Dipper chuckled softly, but the sound was fond. "I guess it does." They lingered in the dream shack for what felt like hours, though time moved gently here, stretching and folding like soft fabric. Each step carried no rush, no pressure, just peace, just the comfort of being surrounded by places and memories that felt like home. And in the center of it all, the shack seemed to hum faintly as though it was a lullaby itself wrapping them in safety. The glow of the shack slowly softened, its edges dissolving into silver mist. Dipper blinked, and when he looked again, the walls had melted away. He and Mabel now stood in an open field wide and endless, the night sky stretching above them in every direction. The stars were impossibly close, not tiny pinpricks, but vast, glowing lanterns suspended in the sky, shimmering with warmth. The ground beneath their feet wasn't grass anymore. It was starlight itself, soft and cool, glowing faintly with each step, as though they were walking on a sky turned upside down. Every movement sent little ripples of light beneath them, like stepping across the surface of a quiet, glowing pond. Mabel gasped, squeezing Dipper's hand. "We're walking in the stars," she whispered, her voice reverent, but still carrying that spark of wonder she always had. Waddles trotted beside them, his little hooves lighting up the surface like soft sparks, each step leaving behind a trail of glittering constellations that lingered before fading into the vastness. Dipper let the silence stretch around them for a while, feeling no need to explain or question. He tilted his head back, staring upward where the constellations shifted and changed, not the ones from his journal, not the official patterns he'd studied, but new shapes meant only for them. One constellation bloomed into the outline of two children, side by side, holding hands. Another unfurled into the shape of a pig, plump and glowing, its stars twinkling as if it were laughing. A third spiraled outward into a pine tree, the needles shining brighter than all the rest, its trunk stretching upward as though to connect earth and sky. Mabel pointed upward excitedly. "Look, Dipper, it's us. The universe is doodling." She laughed, and the sound rippled through the air, sending more constellations blooming outward like flowers made of light. Sweaters, glittering hearts, shooting stars, even a glowing smiley face appeared overhead, each one smiling down at them with soft radiance. Dipper couldn't help but laugh too, though his was quieter, steadier. "I think you're right. The sky has been taking notes from you." They walked together, hand in hand, the dream carrying them forward as gently as a tide. The starlit ground curved upward ahead of them, like a hill, and when they reached the top, the whole universe seemed to open at once. Stars stretched endlessly in every direction, glowing in the waves of blue and gold. They pulsed faintly, in rhythm with something larger, like the heartbeat of the dream itself. Mabel sat down at the crest of the hill, patting the ground beside her. Dipper lowered himself too, leaning back on his hands, his gaze locked on the sky above. Waddles flopped happily onto his side beside them, his snores blending into the stillness like a soft drumbeat. For a long while they just sat in silence, watching the stars shift. Some drifted closer, hanging low enough that Mabel could reach up and brush her fingers across the glow, giggling as though she'd just tickled the universe itself. Others trailed across the sky slowly, leaving shimmering paths like glowing paint strokes. Dipper felt a deep calm sink into his chest. There were no questions here, no riddles, no mysteries pressing on him. Just the stars, the dream, and the steady comfort of knowing Mabel was right beside him. The weight he carried in the waking world, the need to solve, to protect, to always be ready, slipped away here, leaving only peace. He lay back fully now, folding his arms behind his head. Mabel flopped down beside him, her hair spreading out across the glowing surface like a second constellation. For a moment, he closed his eyes, letting the warmth of the dream wash over him. When he opened them again, the stars above seemed closer still, as if the universe itself had leaned down to watch over them. Their glow flickered in gentle rhythm, and he thought he could almost hear them singing. Not words, but tones, soft and endless. The kind of song that could carry someone all the way into morning. The edges of the dream blurred slowly, but not with sharpness or fear. It was like a candle dimming, a lullaby fading into the quiet of sleep. The stars pulsed once more, a last shimmering sweep of light across the sky before the meadow, the shack, the forest, and everything else melted into stillness. Dipper's breathing steadied, slow and even, his body curled gently beneath his blankets. Beside him, Mabel's quiet snores continued. Waddles nestled against her. The dream folded softly into silence, carrying him deeper into the kind of rest that only comes after a long, full night. And so the night settles once more over Gravity Falls. Dipper's journal rests closed. Mabel's laughter lingers faintly even in dreams, and the mystery shack sleeps as peacefully as the forest around it. The stars above continue their quiet watch, carrying with them every memory, every secret, every letter written and unwritten. As you drift now into your own rest, may your dreams carry the same calm glow, soft skies, safe places, and the warmth of knowing you're never alone. Let your thoughts quiet, let your breathing steady, and let the stories fade into stillness. Good night from Gravity Falls. Good night from Sleepy Corner. And good night to you.